Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 244, I chat with industry consultants Geoff Tully and Chris Armbrust about what they learned at the HPA Tech Retreat. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded February 19th, 2015. Episode 244, Tales from the HPA Tech Retreat. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by SmartThings. SmartThings lets you monitor, control, and automate your home from wherever you are using your smartphone. Right now, SmartThings is offering Home Theater Geeks listeners 10% off any home security or solution kits and get free shipping in the U.S. when you go to smartthings.com/twit and use the offer code TWIT at checkout. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geeks are Geoff Tully and Chris Armbrust, both industry consultants who have just returned from the HPA Tech Retreat. Geoff, let me start with you. Welcome.
Good morning. Good to see you.
Thank you, and you. And Chris, great to have you back as well.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, both you guys are returning guests, and I'm glad to see you both here because we're going to talk about something really cool today, an annual event called the HPA Tech Retreat. Let's start with what it is and why it's important. Geoff, we'll start with you.
Sure. The Hollywood Post Alliance, the HPA, is a trade association, cleverly named because it has a lot of its membership are people in the Hollywood post-production community. And they each year reserve out about a week in the desert to bring together a group of people to talk tech, talk about new things that are coming up in the industry of technology as it would impact their daily lives and business. This year, actually, the HPA is going through a little bit of change. They've announced a merger or an association with the Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers, SMPTE. But as a part of that combination, they're actually one of the announcements at the event this year was that the HPA, the P is no longer going to stand for post, as in post-production, because it's getting a little hard to tell which processes occur in the camera, on the set, and in the devices streaming content around the world. So it's now the Hollywood Professionals Association.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So I got a new button.
We got new buttons. Oh, you got yours. I should have brought mine.
Excellent.
But a piece of what they did maintain, and SMPTE had their executive management at this event participating and pointing out that this tech retreat was kind of a signature event, very unique to this organization. And it was maintained this year and will be going forward as an opportunity for a group, I think, a little bit north of 400 people to spend the better part of 3 days doing nothing but talking high-tech geek as it pertains to the filmed and recorded entertainment industry.
Wow. It is quite the event. I have not yet attended myself. Chris, I understand this was your first year, huh?
Yeah, this was first time getting out there. It was quite amazing, and quite refreshing. I mean, being there with 300 to 400 people who you can share your most intimate technical thoughts with and have them understand them, and know what you're talking about, which is a lot of fun. And then there's also there were several creative people there, so the producers and directors, and it was great to be able to talk with them, up close and actually hear what they're saying without any filters.
Yeah. Very cool. You know what? I forgot to say at the very top of the show, and I will mention it now, that those of you who are watching live at live.twit.tv or logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv can post questions for Jeff and Chris about the HPA Tech Retreat, and I'll pass along as many as I can. But I wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Throw some of the questions back to Michael, too. I know you in the show pre-note said that Michael Heiss has joined on the chat room. Michael was there for part of the show as well. So
exactly. And Mike Heiss has been a guest on the show as well, and very valued member of the community. And I know he went out there for, I think, one day. And so definitely, if there are questions for Mike, post those in the chat room as well. Now, it's held in the desert, Jeff, as you said, and more specifically in, is it Desert Hot Springs or Palm Desert? Out near Palm Springs, anyway.
Yeah, Indian Wells this year at the Hyatt Grand Champions was the site. They've got a nice conference facility that handles that crowd, that size group really well.
Mm-hmm. Chris, it must, I mean, I would have probably felt just exactly like you did of, wow, here I am with these really high-powered people and able to, you know, interact with them directly, maybe have meals with them, and, you know, get to talk tech in some deep way. Man, that must have just been amazing.
Yeah, it was great. We have, part of the program is that every morning at 7:30, no matter what time you got to bed, is a breakfast where you've got an hour, and there were 32 different subjects to choose from every morning, and you could go sit at a table and talk. You know, I was interested in several of the specifications or the different digital workflows, and just, you know, people who are totally into it, and, you know, over breakfast get a chance to share what's going on. So that was really nice, as well as, you know, all the meals and the breaks and hallway discussions. And then one of the other things that was really nice was that next door was an exhibit area where I counted up somewhere north of 50, maybe as many as 70 different vendors. So if you divide 400 participants into 70 vendors, or vice versa, there, you know, it's quite a ratio where you walk up to a vendor and you can talk to them, and you might be the, you know, one of 2 or 3 people that are talking with them. So you get a lot of attention and get a chance to really get your questions answered and find out, you know, there's so many different things going on right now that it's fun to be able to just talk with people and see, you know, what are they working on, and what are they bringing to the market, and what problems do they see, and again, what solutions do they have?
Yeah, much different, and in a way much better than CES or CEDIA, shows like that, where, you know, you've got hundreds of people or thousands of people in a booth and you can't find the right person, and, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to get information. So this just sounds like an incredible gathering, and there's so much to talk about in terms of what's going on in the Hollywood professional community. Now we'll call it the Hollywood Professional Association. Let me start with the presentation that Jeff and Chris both did there on, I believe, metadata, which is a pretty important thing coming down the pike. Jeff, start us off with what your presentation was about.
Sure. It basically was a follow-on to work that Chris and I had done in the past, using metadata that's assembled and associated with content at the time that it's packaged for presentation, whether it's on a Blu-ray disc or a streaming file, whatever, that basically describes the characteristics of the content in a way that is relevant to the living room in display devices, for, you know, playback devices, audio, amplifiers, TV sets, etc. The concept is that the metadata would be assembled by the program content creators, reflecting the way that they had seen and certified the content before they sent it for distribution, and that metadata, when it arrives in appropriately enabled devices, TV sets, Blu-ray players, Roku boxes, what have you, would be communicated over the digital link, the HDMI or display port, and give the TV set, the AV receiver, enough information that it could go into the correct playback mode automatically User doesn't have to grab for the remote, browse through menus to switch between a variety of different playback modes. Top, bottom, side by side for 3D rendering, high dynamic range versus Rec 709 or 601 for standard def content. Those kinds of things that problems that bedevil a lot of living rooms. And Chris and I have noticed this
Great
over
phrase.
A number of years that he and I have been working in this space. And we were kind of moved to give this presentation by actually another event that HPA and SMPTE did back at a one-day symposium in last year, where one of the members of the creative community, actually Steve Poster, who's a cinematographer, had given a rather eloquent rant from the stage saying that TV set manufacturers need to stop doing motion interpolation. It changes the look and feel and intention of a movie when it's displayed on a television set. That comment rang quite true to Chris and I, as one of the first things that we put attention to in the prior work we had done was, in fact, putting a signal on Blu-ray discs that would allow them to signal a TV set to go into a regular playback mode where the frame rate and color space, et cetera, were preserved accurately. We were delighted to find out that Steve was also on the program the day before our presentation and repeated the same complaint and call for action. And in fact, Scott, you can post in the show notes. I sent you over an email earlier, a little bit ago, a link to an online petition that an associate of Steve's has put online. Over 10,000 people have joined his protest that, don't make my movies look weird. They look really nice when I sent them out. You should watch them that way.
I like it. I like it. Chris, tell us from your perspective the sort of the nuts and bolts of what you were talking about with Jeff. Were you at THX? Did you work on Media Director? Because that's where we're headed here.
Yeah. I mean, as Jeff was saying, we were listening to Stephen at the one-day conference, and both of us were sitting there as Stephen starts talking about, well, just turn these features off and stop trying to do things that we didn't have in mind when we created this content, and which is what we were doing with Media Director. Media Director is a concept of within the home, making sure that the devices get set up in the right modes, and not do some fancy new feature that the TVs can do, but that really distract from or tell a different story. And I've always looked at what I'm doing is helping the storytellers tell great stories and not get in the way and not change the story. And so, for example, with high dynamic range, you've got a case where the TVs, some of them have the capability, some of them don't. Some devices do and some don't. And if you guess wrong at where the, what's supposed to be bright and what's supposed to be dark, or don't project all of that, you're telling a different story. And earlier you were talking about metadata, and there's all kinds of metadata, and this is an area of metadata that seems to get forgotten or left out, and that's what we've always referred to as the artistic intent or the creative intent, so that we can convey that to the end playback devices.
Mike Heiss in the chat room is saying Stephen Poster had the best quote of the show. He said, "Does HFR and HDR, high frame rate and high dynamic range, get in the way of willing suspension of disbelief?" I think that's pretty interesting. Because I've heard a lot of people say that, for example, Jeff, you and Chris both were talking about if motion interpolation, or what's often called frame interpolation on LCD TVs, where you get a 24 frame per second image coming in, video signal coming in, and it bumps it up to 48 or 60 or 120 or 240 or whatever. Makes it look like a soap opera. It definitely gives the picture a very different look. And so what this online petition is, and I will put this in the show notes and make sure everybody knows to go to change.org, And there's much more to the URL than that. But basically, the petition says, we want the TV manufacturers to disable this function, at least when you go to the movie mode or the cinema mode, which I always say you need to select if you want the more accurate picture. That's the first step anyway. And I'm reminded of, I just happened to watch some of Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, last night, and I'm reminded of what the president of the Federation said. Just because we can do a thing does not necessarily mean we should.
That was brought up several times last week.
Oh, yeah? Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah. Exactly.
More in the context of the content and TV features, not so much in specifically Star Trek.
Yes. Right. Yeah, exactly.
This was a technical conference after all.
Although I'm sure there were plenty of Trek fans.
Yeah.
Probably about 400.
Probably about 400, exactly. Well, Media Director, tell us just a little bit about that. And it's not really an active program of THX. It was developed by THX. When, Jeff, you were there at THX. I guess, Chris, you were at least consulting for THX at the time?
Yeah, I was with THX also working with Jeff, where we actually got it fairly far along in getting it implemented in all of the devices and in content.
Mm-hmm. But it had to be this metadata saying what color space you should be in, what picture mode you should be in, and so on, saying that to the TV and telling the AVR what sound mode you should be in, and so on and so forth. All that metadata has to be encoded in the video stream and sent by the source device, and the receiving device has to understand it and know what to do with it. And so I guess THX was trying to work with all sorts of different product manufacturers to implement it. How far did that get?
So we actually, there's all of the different components from the content creation to and getting it on media. So we had it on Blu-ray disc and on DVDs. We had prototyped it with some over-the-top services as well as some cable systems. And we included that so that we had both projectors and displays that could react to that data, and they knew to look for it and knew how to set the presentation up better with that information. So again, we had all the pieces, and it's to get the best benefit from it, you have to have everybody playing, which means all the content creators, all the distribution channels. So whether you've got, Comcast or Charter or whoever, or you're watching it over the air, or you're watching Blu-ray or DVD or Netflix, everybody has to play to really, again, for everybody to get the best benefit from it. And it was a challenging project. I often referred to it as kind of like getting that whole ecosystem in place was, like playing cards where you're drawing, though, to an inside straight flush. It can happen, but it can take a while.
Right. And it won't happen all that often.
Right.
It's true.
One of the things that we were trying to get across last week is that the problem hasn't gone away. In fact, with Ultra HD and all the new technologies, all of the new distribution mediums, actually the problem's gotten worse. I mean, is my source device now my cell phone going to my TV, and how did it do that, and what signal is the best signal to display on the TV if I'm coming from my cell? So the problem's gotten actually even worse. And again, more devices and more content, and we just wanted to put out there that there's still a need for this.
Yes, Jeff, you had something to add there?
Yeah. Scott, as you were, I'm sure, noted as you read through the program, and we probably should look at some of the other things that were discussed at the Tech Retreat.
Of course.
But
Believe me, we will.
Our target here was really the audience. Not that we were talking a solution that's available, but rather a topic that both of us believe pretty strongly is achievable, but it requires a conversation of a lot of people. And many of the people that have to get involved and take this seriously were at least represented by the participants in the room. And we did leave our friend Steve with a comment for the future. If you think motion interpolation is scary and unpleasant, what about the coming time when you'll have a high dynamic range display, but all the content is not yet high dynamic range? There's no doubt that there will be some default mode in the TV set to make high dynamic range happen in some sort of an automatic setting. So bright spots will just get too bright and dark spots will get too dark. I hope we put enough fear in the audience to think that they'd rather see it. Yeah, if you author it with a limited dynamic range, guess what? That's the right way to look at it. Not have a TV set suddenly brighten parts of the picture. If you think frame interpolation disrupts things, imagine the dark scenes becoming too excessively bright and the brighter spots being accentuated, all of that. And it really does now come down to a big part of the conversation at the event was about these new features, newish, higher frame rate, higher dynamic range, that I think that the creative community is taking a look at. Chris mentioned Steve Poster's comment that, or I guess Michael, that not all the cinematographers think that these are the be-all and end-all of presentation, but they're going to become a part of the storytelling. And there was a lot of conversation amongst the people who create movies and do the production and so on and stuff. Just exactly what are we going to have to do now to create all these varying pieces of expanding the technology puzzle, and how soon are they going to happen? Which are good times to turn it on, which are good times to turn it off.
Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, also the big challenges with this Ultra HD coming down the pike, we've got 4 aspects of Ultra HD. The first one that everybody picks up is the 4K displays, but you've also got the high frame rate, you've got the high dynamic range, and you've got the color space that expands. And the challenge is the devices, the production workflow, not everything's all matched up to give us all 444 16-bit. It's not there. Right. And so how do the storytellers create their stories using this medium that's actually going to evolve over the next several years as the TVs get better, as the distribution channels get better. We've got specs for Blu-ray, which the Blu-ray Disc Association just announced this week that they've reached another milestone in the rollout of their spec, and with the expectation that there'll be products, Blu-ray Ultra HD content coming this Christmas. Right. So we've got an evolving it's an evolving ecosystem.
Man, it just seems overwhelming, because how do you implement, and which do you implement, and how far do you go? It's kind of a chicken and egg problem, isn't it? I mean, you've got to have displays that can accept a high dynamic range signal or a wide color gamut signal, but which color gamut? How much dynamic range should we really plan for in creating this content? We, the professional community, I mean. And as Jeff said, some TVs will have this capability, some will not. Some content will be high dynamic range or wide color gamut, some will not. There's plenty of legacy content that isn't. And so getting all these things to talk together just seems to me insurmountable. It's not, but at the moment it kind of seems that way. I wanted to ask both of you about high dynamic range in particular, because this is a real strong element for me personally. I mean, Chris, you mentioned 4K is a bunch more pixels, 4 times the number of pixels. But whether or not you can really see that Depends on the size of the screen and how close you're sitting. It's a marginal improvement, I think, generally. But high dynamic range, you can see that right away. If you have content that's been mastered or graded for high dynamic range, say 10 times what it is now, and you have a display that can display that properly, man, oh man, you can see that across the room without any question whatsoever. You can see it on regular high def. So I'd like to hear what both of you have to say, generally speaking, about what was being talked about in terms of high dynamic range. Let's start there. At the tech retreat, what are people thinking about? What can we expect to see? Are they really going to start creating content? And whose TVs are they kind of looking at to say, we should create TVs content for this type of TV or that type of TV or whatever? Chris, let's start with you.
Okay. Well, a couple things. I mean, of the four, of the four things that make up the Ultra HD, the high dynamic range is the one that it was the feature that I think that everybody is most excited about, because it does have the most dramatic effect in the way the picture looks.
Yep.
In fact, one of the things that it kind of shocked me was there were people saying, well, let's stick with 2K and go with high dynamic range. Because it turns out if you go with 4K, it takes, and I don't have the chart in front of me right now and can't remember the numbers, but it takes a lot more bits. I think it's like 400, it's 4 times as many bits.
Yeah, exactly.
And yet the high dynamic range only takes 50% more bits, maybe as little as 25 with some of the compression techniques, and yet you get a much bigger impact. And the same thing actually with high frame rate, because that compresses well, and the wide gamut can also be done with fewer bits. So the first thing that's been jumped on for Ultra HD has been the 4K, and it's the one that has the least impact.
Yes, I know. I couldn't believe that when that came up. I was just going, come on, you guys. And I think I've heard it said before many times. Joe Kane's been on the show saying it, and others as well, that the TV manufacturers have led this parade, and in fact caught the professional community a bit off guard by all of a sudden showing all these 4K TVs that don't have anything else other than more pixels, which is, as you say, the least important, the least impactful of these different elements that we're going to end up seeing in UHD.
Yeah, well, the 4K displays was a byproduct of developing the 3D displays. You needed twice as many pixels to do the 3D, so they did that both in X and Y, and you end up with 4K.
Right.
Which was also an interesting discussion, because there's people that going, 4K isn't 4K. Let's call it Quad HD.
Yes. Well, certainly we've talked on this show many times that 4K and Ultra HD are not the same thing technically. But the name, the term has been so conflated and just used synonymously. Even I've sort of fallen into that trap. But now Mike Heiss in the chat room is making a good point, because not only do we have to worry about whether or not the content's going to be in high dynamic range, whether or not the TV can display it or not, but there's at least 4 or 5 different high dynamic range systems out there. There's Dolby Vision, there is Technicolor, Philips, Fraunhofer. Well, Fraunhofer I think is doing, I don't know if they're doing high dynamic range or not. But there's certainly more than one out there. And are we going to settle on? Oh, SMPTE is the other one. SMPTE 2086. Are we going to settle on one of those? Are we going to be able to use all of them? Is this another format war? What was said in this regard, Jeff?
Well, there certainly was the point made that there are a variety of approaches being taken to this. I think most of the conversations that I heard in the presentations oriented around what are you going to do at the creative end. Is it difficult, or does it fit into existing workflows and so on? Do current cameras support high dynamic range? And a lot of that level of conversation basically indicated that yes, there are workflows being developed by SMPTE and other organizations. The Academy Motion Pictures has an ASIS workflow that captures basically everything that comes into the camera and holds it. Some of that information can be used in workflows today. Other parts will be there when you remaster for a high dynamic range that hasn't been yet decided. So there was a lot of the technology conversations that what do you need in order to capture your content? What workflows do you go through to get it suitable for today's TVs or next year's TVs? Take your best guess at what will come, but don't throw away any bits. If anything, this 4K sudden appearance has taught us, it is that the number of years where all the movies in the cinemas were shot with 2K cameras and finished in 2K. You're never going to see those movies any better than 2K. You can actually step back a few years and get a film master and pull some 4K content out of those and remaster them in digital. But the ones that were produced in digital at 2K kind of got locked in a time warp. So there was certainly some conversation at this show about how do you future-proof your stuff? How do you, if high dynamic range of a certain flavor is going to be possible, capture and save that information, even though there's no display today that you could look at it to judge whether you like it or not. Save the bits.
Yes, and that's a very good point. The ASIS workflow is something that we've talked about on this show. David Reisner, who was involved in developing it, has talked about it as well. Chris, would you give those of us who aren't professionals in this industry sort of a definition of what a workflow is?
Okay, so the workflow basically means, from when you do the camera shoot to taking it into post where you're doing color correction, doing all of the storytelling edits to that, mixing that with sound, and creating the digital master that then is going to flow into the different distribution channels. And whether those distribution channels are broadcast over the air or whether they're going to be an over-the-top service, as well as whether they're going to, as well as getting those bits to the disc. And there are many challenges because right now, another interesting thing was, particularly for live events, some of the cameras are being built where they're recording a high, JPEG 2000 quality video. So they're doing, JPEG 2000s, which are stills, but they're doing those for the video. But the same camera will have an output where it's going AVC or some other already encoded streams that can be actually direct fed into a streaming service. So it's how do you set all of that up and have the flow work so that your content ends up in the right format for the next step in the process. So that if somebody's going to be putting the lower thirds on, that they've got the right they've got the right PNG to work with or whatever format that's going to be. The other thing that happens there is you've got a big transition going on right now where we're moving from SDI, which is this serial digital interface, and basically cable, to moving to a workflow where everything is file-based and streaming-based. And that's creating major changes because you've got plants that are set up where they've got all the cables strung, they've got their switchers and routers and all of that are working in that domain. And you've got new services that are coming along that are all file-based. And so everything is moving in an IP domain.
Now, explain a little bit what you mean by that. SDI is basically allowing video streams to be sent from one device to another. And by file-based, do you mean like you've got a file sitting on a computer and you move it over, or a server, and you move it over to your computer to work on and then move it back to the server? Is that what you're talking about here?
Yeah, or maybe it just stays on the server, but yeah, yeah. So it's in the old days, what you would do is you would take the SDI signal, record that to tape, and then if you wanted to work on that, you would digitize that to a file and then bring that into your editor and do your editing. maybe record it back out to tape, and then it would be played out from tape via, all using this SDI or a cable-based, what is it, RJ58 or whatever it is for that signal flow. Whereas today, all of that is, I'm going to work on this file, it stays as a file, I'm going to put it on this server, and this server will then start transcoding that for the different distributions, or if it's still being in the edit process for the proxies, so that they can be worked on and reviewed and approved, and then sent on and finally integrated into the final master.
Well, that certainly sounds like a more efficient and less prone to problems.
Well, it can be more efficient, but I was amazed, because if you've ever handed somebody a file that even a Word file, what version of Word is it? Okay. So if I'm handling somebody a digital file with, here, take my video, well, what codec did you use? And did you use the 8-bit version or the 10-bit version? And okay, now I've got 4.3 content that came into a picture that's going to end up in 16.9. What do I do with that? How do I integrate that into the, so the workflow design says, how do I go in and make it so that everybody creates and passes on in the right format to the next step in the process. And there were a few sessions on doing automated QC to help with that process, because it can be, the time frames that are being the time frames that content's being created in right now are in some cases mind-boggling. They used an example of a show that was green-lighted in August of last year and was distributed before Christmas, which in Hollywood terms is unheard of.
Lightning fast.
That's lightning fast. And the way that they did that is it was all a digital workflow. And again, things can happen really quick. But if you've got files that don't, that aren't conformed, or they're not in the right format, that really slows things down. So.
Well, I now understand workflow a little better, and thank you very much. It's obviously a really important part of the process that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about all of this new stuff that's coming for Ultra HD. We're going to talk. Sorry, Jeff, you had one more thing to say there?
Yeah, just part of the conversation in a lot of areas too in this workflow. You mentioned the piece about, well, if you work on a file on a server and then move it to another place to work on it. Even today, and certainly as you look at the 4K files, you're moving really big pieces of information around a lot. That slows down. You sit and wait a long time. There's a lot of attention being given, and there was quite a bit of conversation during the show and during some of the breakfast meetings that Chris mentioned on cloud-based workflows, where the files are put at the earliest possible moment up into an online web service, whether it's Amazon Web Services, AWS has a big service set up around cloud-based collaborative production, and a number of the tools, including some of these file-based analysis tools and color correction and these kinds of things, more and more have at least some part of it being possible to enable in a centralized cloud base. And so a lot of the technology that's working in and around that was part of the discussion, has been in years past, and it seems to be moving quite a bit, which of course changes a lot of the architecture, literally physically, of the traditional post-production world, where it used to be physical buildings and you took a tape from place A to place B. Maybe, and as you got modernized, you used Aspera or some other service to digitally move the file, but you still moved it to the building where the colorist was looking at things. Now, with a cloud-based architecture, you could conceivably take your high-powered laptop or your Mac Pro anywhere, connect onto the central archive, and do your part of the workflow from a remote location.
Yeah, of course, that would require very high bandwidth internet access to make that efficient, wouldn't it?
Some parts of it, but if the whole file itself doesn't need to physically come to your building, it stays in the cloud. Your piece of the work, depending on what part you're doing, you don't necessarily need to have the actual file in your hands. You just you're looking at a display with some dials and knobs and settings to put in, and those can be applied on the content. And then once they're applied, a rendered version of a frame or two could be possibly downloaded to you, possibly doesn't need to be at full resolution for you to see the impact of the work that you've done. And so there are a lot of different ways to approach making this work. And again, this part of what a conference like this is about is letting people know what things are on their way into their toolkit.
Got it. Well, we got a lot more to talk about from the HPA Tech Retreat, but before we do, I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor for this episode, which is SmartThings. I really want to tell you about CNET's highest-rated smart home system, which is called SmartThings. SmartThings allows you to monitor and control and automate your home from anywhere using your smartphone. Now your lights, locks, thermostats, home security are all connected through a single app. You don't have to have different apps for each product, which is very cool. Intuitive controls allow you to set up the rules on your smart home through their free iOS, Android, or Windows Phone apps. With SmartThings, you can customize the way your smart devices talk to each other, so you can, for example, tap "Good night" on your phone and the lights turn off, the thermostat adjusts, and the door locks. You can set your lamps to brighten each morning at sunrise or when you wake up, which for me is quite a bit after sunrise. You can even keep your home protected with SmartThings home security, motion detection, water detection, and more. So if you live in a flood area, that's pretty important. Hey, this is a really cool application. You can enable your speakers to broadcast dogs barking if there's motion outside the house. I just love that. You can set a camera to take a series of photos when unwanted motion or entry is detected. And you can have your doors recognize when you're close and unlock themselves as you walk up. Now, some really big news I found out just this week for home theater owners. Logitech Harmony has now joined SmartThings Labs, and you can now integrate your home entertainment system into your smart home and control and automate everything that Logitech Harmony can control, which is over 270,000 devices. Now, Logitech Harmony, anyone who's listened to me for any length of time knows that Logitech Harmony is my favorite universal remote, and it's made even better now by integrating with the smart home system. Now you can control your entertainment system from the SmartThings app, as well as controlling SmartThings devices from the new Harmony Home Control remote. You can do things like automatically turn on the local news or weather channel when you wake up, have your TV turn on when you come home and turn off when you leave, or set your Sonos system to play a certain station or playlist when you open a door. There are so many ways to customize your SmartThings home. Now, SmartThings was named CES 2015 Editor's Choice Award by Time.com, the website of Time magazine. So that's a pretty nice feather in their cap, if you ask me. To get you started setting up your smart home now, go to smartthings.com/twit. SmartThings is offering Home Theater Geeks listeners 10% off any home security or solutions kits, and you get free shipping in the U.S. As I said, go to smartthings.com/twit and use the offer code TWIT at checkout. And we thank SmartThings very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Okay, so getting back to the HPA Tech Retreat, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other things that were discussed there. We talked about high dynamic range. High frame rate is another really important element of things here. Actually shooting content at a higher frame rate than movies, which are still mostly at 24. The Hobbit movies notwithstanding, they were shot at 48. And James Cameron, I think, is planning to do the next Avatar movies at a higher frame rate. But most things are still at 24. While video, TV is typically shot either at 24, sometimes 30, sometimes 60 in the case of 720p. And I got a question in the chat room, and if I can find it, I will. but it had to do with high frame rate. Oh, Yogi asks, I don't actually think that higher frame rate improves the quality. Well, it depends on how you define quality, I guess. Chris, what was your takeaway on high frame rate from this show?
Well, high frame rate at this show got pretty dissed.
Really? Interesting.
It was, you know, yeah, anyway, people weren't real excited about it. The whole, from a creative point of view, you're looking to tell a story, and you're looking at the tool set that you have, and you're trying to make it as convincing as possible. And one of the things that you're playing with is the look and feel. And part of that feel is the frame rate. Well, and the that suspension of disbelief. If you have the 24 frames per second, which is the film frame rate, it looks a certain way. It also has some artifacts. Wheels run backwards. Things are blurred that maybe should have been blurred or shouldn't have been blurred, but they're blurred. Yeah. And what people who are creating films, what they learn to do is to use those artifacts of 24 frames per second to tell the stories. I think part of the challenge in the industry is that those tools are different. There's different effects that show up when you're running at 48 or 60 or 120. And when those things show up, they affect the way that you can tell the story. A couple of years ago at one of the SMPTE tech conference in the fall, they were showing 120 and 240 frames per second, and showing how that allowed the storytellers to tell stories in different ways than they could tell at 24. You can do different camera motions. You don't have to do multiple angles. You can actually do a pan where things don't blur all out at 120 frames. Whereas at 24 frames, it doesn't make any sense, and in fact might be a little nauseous. Again, it's a different feel. But
I guess we're all down to feel and sort of some sort of slightly intangible quality.
Well, when we were doing, you know, when Jeff and I were working on the THX Media Director, one of the things that we were fighting or actively discussing with the engineers is that every engineer has got a better algorithm for making the picture better, whether that be contrast or motion interpolation or, you know, whatever. But they've got a cool new algorithm that they want to use to do that. And some of those algorithms detect what they think are artifacts, and they take those artifacts out. Well, when you take the artifacts out, you've changed the way the picture looks, or you've changed the way the sound sounds. And that has a different emotional impact. And so my convincing argument for the engineers was, you know, how do you convey that emotion? Where in your equation, where in your algorithm does it do you have an emotional component?
The emotional slider, the emotional control.
Yeah, and it's not there. So, because you can guess in the algorithms, but you're always guessing. And again, you know, high frame rate, it eliminates some artifacts and it introduces some others. But the creative, you know, cinematographers and the directors and producers, they know how to work with that 24 frames per second. They don't necessarily know how to work with the 48, and you know, James Cameron's been working with it, and he's getting up on the learning curve of what you can do with it and how it works and what the effects are and what the response is from the viewers. But it's a new part of the palette of telling stories, and so, you know, whenever there's change and new things, there's apprehension and concern.
Well, and we're certainly facing a lot of new things right now. I've heard a number of people say that when they went to see The Hobbit, for example, at 48 frames per second, you know, it looked kind of like that motion interpolation, frame interpolation that we see on TVs that's applied to 24 or 60 frame. It makes it look like video. And they say that, oh, well, if you shoot at these high frame rates, it also looks like video. It doesn't look like a movie, like a film. Well, we haven't been using film in a while, save for a few directors. But is that part of the objection, Jeff, that they say, well, it just doesn't look like a movie anymore?
That's certainly a piece of the conversation. And then there's some of the cinematographers who have become taken with the digital cameras, and they say, well, it doesn't look like a film shot movie that was using 24 FPS film, but it looks exactly like the 60 FPS digital movie that I shot and produced. What you got is an expanding palette. And, you know, there were certainly a number of comments, as Chris pointed out, at this year's event, where the fact that high frame rate is becoming possible doesn't make it necessary. It certainly isn't an essential part of the toolbox. There are movies that can be well done and shouldn't be done any other way, according to the guy who's making it. It's, after all, it's his story.
Right.
So there's a lot of that, and it is the creative intent. And the creative intent, the number of intentions you can have and execute today, it's a much bigger palette. There are many more things you can do. So part of the artistry, the storytelling, is to say which of these tools tells the story I want to tell. It's going to be fascinating to watch it evolve. I just happened to notice one of my daily email news blasts. Next week's Modern Family, I believe, is going to be an interesting testament to creative intent. The entire episode has been produced using mobile devices, iPhones and iPads.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Google it out, and I've already set up for TiVo to record it. It sounds like a fun event. Part of what Chris was saying, you know, your iPhones and your iPads can become the source device, not only the display device. And
also the capture device in this case.
Yeah. You know, it's the production tool, and the editing is done on that, et cetera. So all of these things kind of factor in there. You know, there's a lot of conversation, not only at this tech retreat, but other HPA events in Hollywood in the last couple of years. Canal Reeves did an interesting documentary on the called Side by Side, which I think you can get online, at least order it, which talks, you know, is interviews with a lot of different filmmakers and their take on the move side by side, film and digital being the two sides. And some very strong opinions from some producers and directors on, you know, digital's the only way, the film is dead, to other people that say, I'm going to petition Kodak to keep making film well beyond its profitable life, because it's the only way to tell the stories that I know, that I want to tell.
Right. This expanding palette that you're talking about is fascinating to me, because it kind of implies that if we're going to have this, if movie makers or storytellers are going to have this expanded palette of options of frame rates and dynamic range and color spaces and so on, we're going to need workflows that can handle all of that, and for the consumer, displays at the other end that can respond and display all of those things appropriately. And we don't yet. And I don't know whether or not when we will, if we will. I mean, that's part of the whole reason we have standards, right? Is so that people can make products that all work together and behave as they're supposed to. Is it reasonable to expect that standards will be able to be developed that will allow for this wide palette of options? Chris, what do you think?
So there are several standards committees and standards groups that are working on different aspects of the problem right now. And there was some discussion about how they are all playing together, because there was actually one group, you know, mainly coming from this camp that did a video release in 3 months that says, standards, who needs standards? We don't have time for them. and then, you know, the rest of the crowd, the folks that have been around for a while that know without standards it's going to be chaos and painful, are going, we've got to do the standards. And part of doing the standards is going in and figuring out how all of the, you know, this hard stuff is going to work. And a lot of the work's been going on for several years now, and I'm starting to see a lot of fruition of those efforts. So I think over this year is a big year for the standards getting released, and there's been a kind of a pragmatic look at the standards and saying, let's not do the standards so that we've got everything figured out and it's gonna hold for the next 10 years or 20 years or 40 years. Let's do the best that we can for what we know today. Take that, work with it, see how it works, how it doesn't work, how we can improve it, and then move on and come up with an enhancement to it or add an addition to it in coming years and make it more of an iterative. And
yeah,
I think
in other words, make the standard kind of open-ended or extensible.
I think the key is making it extensible. You know, just as earlier as I was saying about the high frame rate got dissed, it got dissed on as a distributing in high frame rate. But as an acquisition, even the folks that were saying, "Yeah, I don't want to distribute my stuff in 48," they're going, "But I might want to capture in 48 or 60 or 120, because that gives me more creative things that I can do. Because I can always downsample, but I can't upsample. So the more on the acquisition side that I can do, you know, higher dynamic range and high frame rate and better color gamut, the more I can then in the creative process and in the distribution process, I can make it look good on the iPhone. I can make it look good on a tablet, but only if I started with more bits, not if I started with less."
Joe Kane has made this point also in terms of capturing content even at 4K. He advocates capturing content at more than 4K resolution and then downscaling it. Just like nowadays we capture a lot of things at 4K and downscale to high def, to 1080p. So getting more than you're ultimately going to use in any of these parameters, I think, is a really good idea. Michael Heiss in the chat room is mentioning something about high frame rate that I think is really important. You need so much more data. You need 200% more data, he says, one speaker showed, for high frame rate versus the medium-high impact you get. And in fact, some people object to it, so it would be a negative impact in that case, as opposed to going out to a wider color gamut, say from 709 to 2020, which we've talked about on the show a number of times. It takes 125% more data, also for medium impact, while high dynamic range is 125% more data for high impact, which is their words, not his, he said. But I think he makes a good point. I myself am also mostly interested in high dynamic range at this point because it has much higher impact. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention was I saw that in one of the breakfast roundtables, there was one item there, should all content be shot at 4K 120 FPS, which, Chris, goes to your point about shooting everything at that very high frame rate might very well be the thing to do, because then you can just simply downsample it to whatever you need it to be.
Yeah, and then when you look at the workflows and it's like, what are you going to do with all those bits and how are you going to move them around? It becomes a huge challenge.
Indeed.
Yeah, and another interesting session. Jim DeFilippis gave an interesting presentation. Some of the study work that he's been involved in and looking at. Okay, you just said you downsample your high frame rate. So if you've shot at 120 and you want to take that back to 30, how do you do that? You know, if you take one picture and then skip 3 and then take another one, well, then you've left out a lot of temporal information. It's going to look very jittery. If you try blurring a couple of the frames together, that gives you a different kind of effect. And of course, we can't share with you over here because you don't have the videos of it. But the examples he showed certainly paced the idea of shooting at high frame rate and then delivering it or posting to get to other frame rates is not a simple issue. The resolution, the color, some of those are somewhat approachable with algorithms that people either understand or feel that they could get a handle on. I think the higher frame rate, you know, how to make something captured at 120 look like 24, not completely well understood. That's an interesting theoretical challenge. I don't know how much time we've got left. You're the one with the stopwatch.
Just not much.
I wanted to note one thing, and I will send you some email links to put into the website. While the presentations that we saw are frequently made available online, it's largely to the people who attended the event for, I think it's 4 to 6 months that they're embargoed. But the HPA website has a lot of information on sort of the program of this year's event, but also the past years archived. And the previous year archives, presentations, and so on are available generally to people that log in on the website. In fact, as we were talking about high frame rate, I quickly checked last year. Mark Shubin made an interesting presentation on high frame rate, high resolution, better pixels, and that presentation is a PowerPoint that's online on the HPA website. People that want to kind of look at his take on some of the things where high frame rate is nice and solves certain problems.
And Mark Shubin he knows what he's talking about, and he's a very interesting guy too. So.
Yep, and you can find through the HPA website links to his blogs and so on. Mark is the master of ceremonies for the Tech Retreat, so his perspective is well founded, long experience, as you're saying, and but also an entertaining presentation of a lot of diverse ideas in this space. Yeah.
I want to give you, Jeff, a moment to talk about the other presentation that you gave, which was on Beamer, B-E-A-M-R, which you've been on the show before to talk about. Or no, I take it back. It was the Beamer guys that were on the show to talk about. You're working with them. Tell us a little bit about what that is and what you talked about at the Tech Retreat.
Yeah, you're right. It was Dror Gill, the CTO at
That's right.
Beamer, that was on your previous podcast. But basically, Beamer is a technology company. They participated in the Tech Retreat last year in the demo area, showing things that they intended to bring to market in terms of optimizing video files, allowing you to take an input video file that's been compressed for distribution, and essentially by optimize, what they mean is make the file size smaller, the bit rate lower, but don't give up on the picture quality. So this is obviously a message we felt was going to resonate quite well with the HPA crowd, since they're all about quality. This year I came back with a short update, basically commercial implementation that has taken place. MGO, which is a streaming media movie service, has recently gone public with the fact that they're using the Beamer technology to optimize their data streams, and I was able to show a few of the results that they've had that will give better streaming performance, better behavior of the content on servers and so on. And so that was basically the update there.
Okay. Chris, I wanted to ask you about another panel that I saw in the program, and I didn't know if you had attended it or not or talked to anybody about next-gen cinema test material.
Let's see. Let me see what I can remember on that one. So one of the things I wanted to say I liked about this conference is that it was single-tracked, in that if you were there attentive, you got to hear all the speakers.
That's great. In other words, unlike some of these things where you have 3 things going on at once, and you have to choose.
Yeah. No, it was nice because you could be there and attend all the sessions that you wanted. The only distraction being the demo room next door, where there was all kinds of great stuff to see and people to talk with. But the next generation, I'm trying to remember, when was that?
It was late in the afternoon.
Hopefully not right after lunch.
No, it was like 4 on Wednesday.
Okay.
Like 4:45 on Wednesday.
Okay.
Next Generation Cinema Test Materials. Dave Stump and Garrett Smith from Ampus.
Oh yes, sorry, I did attend that actually, Garrett.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I'm just interested in that because you know, for example, you've got the STEM material, the standard evaluation material, that the I think ACS or one of those organizations put together to evaluate digital cinema projectors. And I was really curious to know what they had put into the test material for the next generation of content, which is what we've been talking about all afternoon here.
Yeah, there is some new material, and one of the things that they were showing off was, you know, just the difference between 2020 and the DCI, or the digital cinema P3 standards.
Color gamuts we're talking about.
So the color gamut is better. Yeah, but I don't have anything else more to say on that right now.
Oh, okay. I'm curious, did anybody talk about 2020? I mean, this is a very difficult gamut to achieve in displays, and it seems unreasonable to me that that would be a step that would be taken soon.
Well, one of the things that was exciting there was that they did show off the new laser projectors. And the laser projectors have the ability to actually go beyond 2020. And though that, and there were several clips that were shown both by Real D and on the center screen that we had there that were showing off the laser. And the laser is amazing because with a laser you can chemically control the frequency. And you can also get a very sharp curve on where your RGB values are. And it's a different look, and it's quite vibrant. The other thing that they're looking at doing is that what we see on TVs is oftentimes much brighter than we're going to see in a theater. Because,
no question. Yeah.
And so they're trying to make the theater experience and trying to bring the technology to the theater experience so that the screens are much brighter, so that they can actually take advantage of the high dynamic range.
Wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah. So the laser projectors I think they're fabulous, and there have been some challenges that looks like they've pretty much overcome, and I think. What is it? They're looking initially at 1,000 theaters with laser projectors, and looking to grow that as fast as the theater owners can afford them.
Well, there is that.
Yeah.
But what about the problem of metamerism, which I noticed in the program there were several presentations on, which is when you have very narrow primaries, red, green, and blue primaries, such as in a laser projector, then when you display a particular color, different people will see it and perceive it differently. And
yeah, there was a session called "Do You See What I See?"
Right.
Yeah, it turns out that one of the side effects of having very narrow RGBs is that we don't all see the same. So what they've noticed is that, you know, kind of the old-fashioned way is that you've got a fairly broad RGB for each one of them, so they're fairly broad. But when you bring them in for laser, they're very narrow, and although they're very precise, our ability to perceive that varies from person to person. And right. Even in color grading, it's like, well, how do you grade that? Because you've got two colorists who might come up with a different tweak on that.
Exactly. So this is yet another thing that has yet to be solved. Mike Heiss in the chat room is saying the 2020 stuff on the Christie laser looked amazing. Chris is 100% correct. And I have no doubt. I wish I could have been there. And in fact, Mike is saying in the chat room, next year we will drag you out to the desert for HPA. Yeah. And I don't think it'll take much dragging. I intend to go next year because it just sounds like too fascinating a thing to miss. It's just great. Unfortunately, we've run out of time today, but you've given us a very interesting look into what happened there. And, you know, there's a lot of work yet to do, and there's plenty of opportunities for people to improve the experience that we have in the home theater and in the commercial cinema. So thank you both very much for being here. Chris Armbrust, appreciate you coming out to this. You even went to the studio. Thank you so much.
It's a short run up the road.
Yeah, appreciate it. And Geoff Tully, thank you again also for being here and sharing your experience.
Thank you. And Scott, like I said, I'll send some web links over for the HPA site. Even those people that don't want to go next year want to follow and find more about the past presentations and the like can do that.
Excellent.
Let me steal half a second and say hello to my daughter, Madison, who's sitting in Florence right now on her study abroad. Wanted to...
Oh, wow.
Hey,
Florence.
Say hi.
hope you're doing well over there in Florence. That's great. Well, thank you so much, both of you. And I think it's about time. Let's see. Chris, your website is marin-digital.com. I'm going to make sure people can find you. And Jeff, you've elected to share your email in case anybody wants to contact you.
Absolutely.
Which, Geoffrey, you can see it there in the lower third, Geoffrey, Geoffrey at Tully, TULLY.com. So thank you so much for sharing that information and sharing your time with us today. You can find me, of course, at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv, and you can follow me on Twitter at htgeekscott and at avsforum. And you can find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here on twit.tv/HTG, also on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit-home-theater-geeks. Don't forget that starting in March, which is only 2 shows away now, Home Theater Geeks starts at its new time, half an hour early, 2 p.m. Pacific time, 5 p.m. Eastern, still on Thursdays, just a half an hour earlier than it has been for a while now. So be sure to set your calendars and tune in for the new time and the Home Theater Geeks, which I've got a ton of great guests scheduled all the way through April and some into June and beyond. However, next week is still a little up in the air. I'm working with Simpty to find a guest for next week who will perhaps be one of the people on the standards committees or something very interesting. And I know you will want to tune in for it, even though I'm not entirely sure what it's going to be yet. I know it's going to be cool, so look forward to seeing you then. Until then, geek out.